Okay. Good evening and welcome to the February 25th, 2021 Parks and Recreation Commission special video meeting. This meeting will be a workshop format for the Commission to provide input toward the Recreation Recovery Reset Plan. I'm Roy Westberg, Parks and Recreation Commission Chair. In accordance with Proclamation 20-28.10 and the Governor's extended Safe Start Order, tonight's Park and Recreation Commission meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being recorded and will be broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. City staff Ryan Daly, Jason Kintner, Katie Herzog, and Merrill Thomas-Schatt, Council Member Liaison Jake Jacobson, and Consultant Emily Moon are participating in tonight's meeting remotely. Other public audience members are listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. Welcome to all and thank you for joining us tonight. Commissioners, would you please turn on your microphones while the city staff calls the roll?
Thank you. Chair Westberg.
Here.
Vice Chair McCarthy.
Here.
Commissioner Richter.
Here.
Commissioner Cohen.
Here.
Commissioner Gualtieri.
Here.
Commissioner Birkenwald. Commissioner Struck.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Commissioners, before we start the business of tonight's meeting, I want to remind you of the rules we've been following to help these Zoom meetings run smoothly. If a commissioner has a question, please use the raised hand feature that you'll find at the bottom of your screen, I believe. I'll do my best to recognize commissioners in the order in which the hands are raised. Everyone will be asked to limit him or herself to one question and to one clarifying question if necessary, so that each commissioner has a chance to ask a question before a commissioner is given another chance to ask a question. Additionally, prior to speaking, please state your name for those listening in on the meeting. Tonight's agenda will not include in-person public appearances in accordance with Proclamation 20-28.11 and the Governor's extended Safe Start Order. And my understanding is no one signed up by the deadline to speak to the group tonight. So we will move past public appearances and go right to the agenda. Tonight we have a single agenda item, which is discussing the Recreation Recovery and Reset Plan. And to get us going on that, we welcome Operations Transition Team Manager Ryan Daly, Consultant Emily Moon, and Recreation Coordinator Merrill Thomas-Schatt.
Thank you, Commissioner Chair Westberg. First of all, I want to thank the Commission for this is our second special meeting for the Recreation MICEC Reset Plan. Thank you for your volunteerism and your availability in this scheduling. It's very helpful as we move forward. So I just want to recognize this Commission and all of the time that you are putting in and how appreciative we are as staff to help us formulate this plan moving forward. So with that, and with my gratitude, I want to turn it over to our consultant, Emily Moon. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ryan. All right, I'm going to jump right in. We have, of course, another full agenda. And hopefully we will pause for questions. I think I have about 3 different places where I'm going to turn over the microphone and ask you all to engage with each other and to provide us with some feedback. So I'm going to share my screen now. Merrill, looking good? Okay, great. All right, so tonight, that full agenda includes just a very brief progress update, particularly for folks that may not have checked in on earlier meetings. We can explain where we are in the process. And then the bulk of the meeting we're going to spend on 3 different topics. We're going to discuss the pricing strategy that we need to create to fit in with this more comprehensive strategy for the reset. And a piece of that is the fee study work that is underway. We're also going to review the Let's Talk survey results. That survey was open for about a month or just over a month, I think, with community members. And then lastly, we're going to start talking about ideas for services and programs to offer and what might govern what is offered when and to what degree. And we'll talk about the framework that we are considering for making those difficult choices. So where we are at, we have developed an immediate action plan. That immediate action plan has one particular program or service that is primary, and that's to offer summer camp. We're going to do that a little differently than the city has done in recent years. We're going to not hire a fleet of staff to run those programs, but instead rely on contractors and partners in the community to help us operate the summer camps. We are continuing to watch how the pandemic unfolds, I'd like to say wraps up, and look at possibilities for opening the facility to facility rentals, which is, again, an area of operation that we think might be manageable with the limited resources that we have on hand right now or in the near future. And then lastly, we are continuing to work on that long-term reset plan, that comprehensive strategy that I spoke about. The commission has done a wonderful job helping us to categorize services and programs according to who benefits. And we plunk those into a model that we call the cost recovery pyramid, or the cost recovery and resource allocation philosophy. In addition to that, we've gathered input on priorities from community members, and we've collected a whole bunch of different data, but including the fee data that you will see some examples of tonight. Where we're going. So the next big steps are to finish developing this cost recovery and resource allocation philosophy, the pricing strategy, of which the fee study is only a part. And then lastly, we want to try to identify some related policies that will need to be tweaked or added to the city's book of policies in order to implement this strategy successfully. All of that will be wrapped up into what we call the roadmap for the reset, or that comprehensive strategy. And that will include a phasing plan. As we've talked about, this is less than a light switch where you just flip it on and off. It's more of a dimmer switch where we need to figure out how much we can toggle up and resource over time. And we'll talk about those goals as we go forward tonight. So our first topic is the pricing strategy, and I wanted to talk about what that means and how we go about developing it. So a pricing strategy is really about setting reasonable fees that are responsive to many different factors: the marketplace, demand, community values, the cost recovery goals. And the purpose is to create a pricing strategy that maintains the financial sustainability of the operation. So that's our vision for the pricing strategy. The steps that we're taking to develop that are to first conduct a fee study, which we'll talk about tonight, and then to overlay other factors such as the cost recovery targets. Then we use that information to develop a new list of fees. The city had existing fees on the book. We need to evaluate whether those are still correct for the new strategy and according to the market data that we have received. And then the next step would be to review any related policies and update those policies. I'm going to give you one example at this point in time, but we're going to spend more time on policies at our next meeting, the regular meeting of the commission on March 4th. But one example is the city currently has what's called differential pricing. So there's a different rate for residents versus non-residents for some types of activities. So that's an example of a policy that we would want to examine, make sure it's still consistent with the goals as we go forward. And then lastly, we're going to pull that pricing strategy into the comprehensive strategy and give it to City Council as part of the overall reset plan. So fee study, let's define that since I've been throwing around that term already several times. Fee strategy can be based on many different things. Sometimes cities or businesses have a strategy where they are attempting to reach a particular revenue goal, for example, and that's an example of an arbitrary strategy, pricing strategy. That's not the strategy that we are using here in Mercer Island. I've highlighted in yellow the two that we're focused on through the fee study, and that's to analyze what the market would say is a reasonable fee for a particular program or service, and then also look at competitors. So where are Mercer Island residents, for example, or individuals who might want to rent the Mercer room for a wedding, where else are they looking to fulfill that, their demand? And so that's the competitor-based approach. Both of those we have tried to examine through the fee study, and we'll talk about that tonight. And then the last strategy on this list we are also using, but it's not part of the fee study, it's separate. And we've talked about that quite a bit in our last workshops, and that's the cost recovery pricing. So understanding what your goals are for cost recovery and how your fees might help you to reach those goals. That's just a piece of it, as the market data is also just a piece of the overall pricing strategy. So at this point, I am going to unshare. We're doing a little tennis match tonight, and Meryl is going to talk about the fee schedule work that staff has been helping to pull together.
Emily, if you don't mind, just keep
I can
sharing.
drive?
Yeah, you could drive for me. I'll
Great.
speak, and Ryan and Emily and Katie can chime in. So before we sort of talk about our fee study and how we designed it and what we found, we really just wanted to show where we're headed with this information, both the fee study and the work you've done on the cost recovery philosophy. In your packet, you received an example of a couple pages of the City of Mukilteo's fee schedule. This is one that we thought was a good example of a similar sort of city in terms of our rental facility. They have a beautiful rental facility there and programming. So in the end, what we'll put together is a complete listing of the fees and rates and pricing policies for our department. This is the first time that we've done something this comprehensive for the Mercer Island Recreation Division. We have similar documents like this in other areas of the city. The Community Planning and Development lists their fee schedules and that kind of thing. So we're looking forward to kind of being more in line as a city. But this is the kind of thing it will show. It'll show our rates. It'll show kind of the discounts or differential pricing that Emily talked about. And it'll show a little bit of the policy. You can see the cancellation percentage down there. It'll just give a good range of fees, policy, guidelines. It'll be a helpful tool for staff, but it's also a good opportunity for transparency to the public too, to sort of show where we're at.
Meryl, if I could chime in on this real quick. Ryan Daly, Operations Transition Team Manager. This document, what you see on the screen right now, we have a similar one that we utilize here at the community center. What's different in this scenario, or I should say we have various examples of this document within our department. What's really helpful in this example is that it's all in one location. So this would be, we would be looking to rope all of our fees into a singular document department-wide, creating a little bit more of a comprehensive look at the overall structure that we have. So I just wanted to share that's a direction we may look to go in the future.
Thanks, Ryan. So far in our work, both as a staff team and with you all as a commission, we've talked about cost recovery and resource allocation. That's one piece of the puzzle for setting our fees. Part of the process to create that fee schedule that we're interested in is conducting our own fee study of some of our neighboring communities in both the private and public sector. So we're going to share this data just to give you some background on how our previous fees compare, kind of where we were at in the market, where we were at in competition for weddings, special events, that kind of thing, and what we've learned that will be helpful in creating that fee schedule. We won't get too deep into numbers, but we're going to kind of show you what we looked at, give you some examples of where we landed, and then talk about how this helps kind of shape our next steps. So in terms of methodology, we identified some similar communities and facilities, both in proximity and just sort of makeup to what we've got here on Mercer Island. We focused on Issaquah, Redmond, Bellevue, and Seattle. And we collected data and spoke to staff on programs and services, rental fee structures and packages, and policies and guidelines. So I narrowed this down a little bit just to not overwhelm you, but this is just sort of an idea of what everyone offers, but everybody does it in a little bit of a different way. And I think one takeaway for us was just seeing that range of ways that you can offer services or ways you can collect fees or package your facility. That was almost more interesting to us than the fees themselves. So this is what we looked at across the board. A few program highlights, just a sampling of our findings. We picked some pretty common services programs across the board. Seattle Parks, Bellevue, Issaquah, Redmond, and then the Bellevue Y. As you can see, it's quite a range from no fee for some of the services in Seattle to a membership fee, like somewhere at the Y. What we are looking at here are sort of extremes, somewhere that we are an outlier or on one end or another, and then just significantly different structures. If we can learn a little bit about what works in different communities about month passes, punch passes, daily rates, that kind of thing, how far folks are willing to travel for a drop-in program not in their community, both coming to Mercer Island and what Mercer Islanders want to do. And you can sort of see our results there at the end and how we compare. Again, just one piece of how we're looking at things for setting program fees. Next, we looked at rentals, and rentals, especially sort of those larger special event types, they're even harder to compare across the board. So we focused a little bit more on us, on how we've done things in the past and where we should head. So what we found is that our previous rental rates were in line with neighboring municipalities, though we did find that we feel like we offer a higher level of service, a higher quality facility than a lot of our neighbors. That's actually more comparable to the private sector. So you can see here for the previous rental rates, how that cost recovery, previous cost recovery kind of stacks up to what we identified as our rentals program in tier 5, 150% cost recovery. As you can see, our meeting room rentals are slightly below our identified minimum cost recovery target for tier 5. And then the Mercer room events are significantly higher than our tier 5 minimum target. This is sort of expected, and we think it kind of tells a good story about those special events that benefit individuals mostly, and benefit sometimes private corporations. It shows what we are recovering for those programs. So we're looking for that balance, right, to kind of meet that aggregate, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that aggregate target in the tier 5. And then I think another big takeaway for us from this portion of our comps was just taking another good look at our rental process as staff and our packages. So we're kind of excited, I think, as a team to dive into what the structure looks like for kind of these higher level, higher revenue events and how we can provide those services better, but also run them smoothly as staff. I'll ask Brian to kind of jump in here too, because he's got good experience here at the center. We looked at sort of the patterns of use of the community center, knowing that, you know, some of those rentals don't quite hit the target, some exceed the target. So we just wanted to understand how the building is being used. This helps us focus kind of our policy questions on how we rent the building, where we market, where we sort of spend that customer service time. Brian, do you want to speak to this a little bit? Yeah,
absolutely, Meryl. One thing I'll call out first is the no charge usage. What that is, just so the commission is aware, that is usage, well, frankly, we don't charge for, but that could be, it could be different departments within the city using the facility, which in turn takes a room out of our inventory. It could be if I were to host a Washington Recreation and Park Association regional meeting or something like that, so that I don't have to travel off island, but there's sort of a joint aspect that may be something we won't charge for. So different things in that area. On the resident nonprofit, I think that's fairly self-explanatory, as well as the non-resident. What's interesting here, I think, is the balance that the facility currently, but previously had. These numbers, I believe, are from 2018. So it does show the balance of how things were allocated, so to speak. So if you could flip back to the previous slide, what that starts to show is where you had those cost recovery numbers at, you know, the low being 104% and the high being 385. When you start to look at what that is in overall facility use, you get much closer to what that minimum cost recovery target is. What we're going to look at through policies and whatnot is how often could those, you know, it might be the lowest rate payers or the subsidized usage or things like that, those no charge fees, are they remaining in line with our overall cost recovery strategy? So that's something we're going to talk about as we move through this process. But I did want to highlight that for the commission.
And Ryan, if I can tag on to that, one of the other things that I'll just remind the commission about is that word minimum is there for a reason. It's quite possible, as we've discussed, that programs and services within a particular tier are achieving below that number. Some will be hopefully achieving above that number. And in the case of tier 5, with those programs and services being some of the ones that you would find more commonly in the private sector as well, it's inherent in the design of that model that the minimum is truly a minimum. And the other thing that I would say is I've had an opportunity just in the last 24 hours, sorry team, new info, to talk to a few colleagues and to double check some data online. And I think this 18–20% no charge usage is pretty common. That's about what I see and hear from other cities. And so it shouldn't be alarming. I think there is a benefit, particularly if you're going to keep your own employees in-house for training opportunities, joint collaboration across different governmental entities. And there's a reciprocity factor that working in local government, I can tell you exists. You know, you rotate who is hosting meetings. So you will always have some no charge usage, and there is benefit to the city organization and to the community at large for that kind of use.
The other thing I'll say is, as a department, this is Meryl, we've looked at sort of started to look at before the pandemic, and I know it's on our list, is to look at the best way to maximize our spaces. So, you know, for those no charge groups, putting them in rooms, especially if it's another city department, putting them in a room that's less used or less attractive for a corporate rental or a social rental. And similarly, even looking at days of the week and times of the day, you know, so that we can really pinpoint how to support as Emily said, our colleagues or our coworkers here at the city, but to do it in a way that maximizes the use of the facility.
All right.
Thanks, that's the fee study.
Okay. So this is just a summary slide, a few notes on the fee policies and the pricing strategy. The future fees for the city will be based on several different factors. We've talked about a few of those. It's the market comps, it's where we want to be in the market, the competitive factor, cost recovery targets, a whole host of factors. So the fee study is only a piece. We are recommending that the city keep the differential pricing. That is still very common across municipalities in our area. It doesn't exist for all programs, so I wanted to make sure commissioners understood that. We need to take a look at that policy, verify the amounts, the discount, and update it if necessary. So that's part of the future work that the team is engaged in. And as I've said before, the pricing strategy is going to be part of that comprehensive reset plan that the commission and the reset team will ultimately send over to the city council. And then a point on the fee schedule itself, while the city has had fee schedules in various departments, including in Parks and Recreation, having fees described in various documents, as Ryan said, the city's municipal code says that there shall be a fee schedule established by the department director and maintained by the department. So we're going to make sure it's all in one place. And furthermore, that it gets updated on a regular basis, because the cost of services will change over time. The trends and what's popular and what's being offered will change, and therefore maybe those programs cost more or less than the programs that were offered a few years ago. So it needs to be a document that is routinely on the city's work plan to take a look at. So at this point in time, I'm going to pause, and Chair Westberg, I'm going to turn back over to you and just ask if commissioners have any questions for the team about the pricing strategy or the fee study.
Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands. So I'll kick off with a question, and then Peter has one. And this is just for clarification purposes. So the council, what ultimately goes to the city council will be the fee strategy, but they won't necessarily be approving individual fees down to the level of the schedule that you showed, for example, for Mukilteo. That's an operational decision that will be left to the director of the Parks and Recreation Department.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Struck.
Thank you. The question I had was in regarding to the fee surveys. It looks like you looked at other municipalities, cities, if you will, and what they offered. Question I have is, did you look at, and I'm thinking specifically on Mercer Island, other private market, like gyms that offer stuff, in terms of room rentals, country club, beach club, they all have room rentals available. JCC, how does Peak Boys and Girls Club, how do they work? As well as the school district. I mean, I know the school district, for example, I believe they rent out their gyms for especially for youth activities and so forth. So was that considered, or what's the status of that, those kinds of things?
Yes, is the short answer. We are definitely looking at private sector. In some cases, it's on island, and in some cases off island. Right. Meeting rooms, for example, or event centers.
Okay, so it's just not showing here yet, I guess is the point.
No, but we are taking a look at that data. Certainly, it's not available for every program and service.
Right.
But, we're cognizant of which services we need to look at that data, and we are incorporating it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Richter.
Yeah, hi, Amy Richter. Emily, could you clarify that slide that had the minimum cost recovery? It was at 150%.
Sure, let me pull it back up so that we can all look at it together.
Because I thought what I heard you say is, even though it's showing as a minimum, it doesn't have to be the minimum. It's just close to a minimum.
Yeah, let's, are you guys seeing it now?
We see the slides.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Let's get back there. Okay, so each tier on the pyramid had a minimum cost recovery target. That minimum was based off of taking a look at what we thought was possible and what was appropriate for supporting the overall strategy of the cost recovery pyramid. So if you recall, the tier 5 and tier 4 programs had targets above 100%. The intent behind that was that those programs would not only cover their direct costs, but have the potential to cover some of their indirect costs and help provide the revenue that might subsidize the programs that are in tiers 1, 2, and 3, which were not 100% cost recovery. In some cases, we anticipate being 0% cost recovery. So that's what 150% represents, is the target for the tier that corresponds to this program and service, which in this case, these are all, well, yeah, they're all tier 5 programs and services. We are advocating that we have a tier aggregate target, because we know some of those programs and services will achieve below this level, some will achieve above. And so that's why we're using the word target. Some of these programs you can see will be making up the difference, others may not. These are also based, the previous cost recovery is based on previous fees. Those are a little bit dated now. So it's quite possible that if we plunk in future fees, that middle column is going to also be closer to the minimum cost recovery target. Commissioner, did I answer your question?
I think so. So when I look at this slide, I interpret it as all of them are minimum target of 150.
Correct, because I think they're all in that tier 5
Okay.
program area. If we showed you the sampling of programs and services from tier 3, you would have different data here.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay.
Commissioner McCarthy.
Thank you. Jody McCarthy. I just was wondering, when you were gathering the fee information from different municipalities, if you have shared information or talked with them about what they're doing as part of their ramping up of their programs, to share ideas about best practices for getting everybody back up to the level that it was previous to.
Yeah, excellent question. Excellent question. We have done some of that as we're collecting data, but also I can tell you that I've sat down last fall, even I sat down with colleagues and asked them those sorts of questions as I was trying to wrap my head around this whole project. So we're continuing to have those conversations. Everybody's in a different place. So there's plenty of opportunity to learn from our colleagues, and yet Mercer Island is unique in the fact that it really shut everything down and had a tremendous amount of budget reductions and staff layoffs. And so we are starting, I think, from a slightly different place than some municipalities, but yes, we are absolutely learning from our colleagues about how and when they are planning to restart services.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gualtieri.
Yep, this is Commissioner Gualtieri. This is very similar to Jody's question, and maybe you don't actually have the answer now, but are all these new fees necessarily going to be increased greater than what they were?
Excellent question. And you're right, we don't yet have that answer. It's a work in progress right now. My gut tells me that there will be some that remain the same. When you look at programs, for example, that are lower cost to begin with, changing it from the increment of change is proportionally greater. And so we need to really evaluate that, whether there has been a proportional cost increase to actually deliver that program is one factor. So I'm anticipating some are going to stay the same. It's possible also some will go down, and certainly impossible some will go up. And we'll hopefully be able to give you a little sense of that, give you a barometer for how much change we are recommending when we come back and report on the draft fee schedule at your next meeting. Or on, I'm sorry, I think we're going to do that on the March 18th meeting.
Any other questions? Commissioner Gualtieri.
Sorry, if no one else has another question. This is unrelated, but why did the fee or the cost recovery target for the Mercer room for 7 hours or more go way down? It was 300 something %, and now the target's 150.
Let me see if I can share that, and we can.
I think that was just in comparison to the target is 100, the minimum is 150. What we were getting.
So that's the proposed target going forward. We wanted to give you a sense of, based on the previous fee, what it would be achieving in terms of cost recovery and how that relates to the proposed target. Okay. Great. Chair Westberg, if there's nothing further, I'll go.
Commissioner Richter has a question.
Amy Richter, Emily, you just said something. You said the proposed targets. Are these minimums or are they proposed?
They're both. Let me see if I can explain. We are going to propose in the new comprehensive strategy that cost recovery resource allocation pyramid that all of you have worked on. And we are recommending minimum target figures for each tier. And by doing that, we're proposing it to council because council is ultimately going to adopt that comprehensive strategy.
Okay, so then it's a minimum, but to me, it's like a minimum of 150, but it could be 250, right? Like you're just saying at a minimum, it has to be that, but are you saying, so maybe it's just semantics here, but it's the minimum and you're proposing it's just 150 versus the minimum's 150. We're not sure what we're going to propose it to be later. It could be much higher.
Correct. The aggregate tier target will be 150, and we're not going to change that recommendation. What is actually achieved by each program or service or the group as a whole, the tier as a whole could be higher. It also could be lower. It could not make the target. That'll just depend on level of participation in the programs, the actual fees received, the actual costs incurred. So we won't know that until after we deliver programs and services.
Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you, Don Cohen. I have to admit that this cost recovery target stuff has been the most difficult thing for me to understand the last couple of meetings. And I've, sort of along the lines that Amy and some other people have said, I'm just sort of waiting to see the real proposed numbers later on to get some context. So my silence should not be taken as that I understand all this, because it clearly is not the case. So.
Okay. We are going to be bringing forward the fee schedule, so you'll be able to see it, I believe, on the 18th of March. And the cost recovery pyramid has already been in front of you. It will be brought back to you at the moment in time when we bring you the whole strategy woven together, all these pieces. But those numbers that we discussed last time for each of the tiers we haven't changed those since we last discussed them.
Commissioner Struck.
Thank you, Peter Struck. So the question I have is kind of going back to the different pricing strategies you talked about at the top, arbitrary and so forth. And clearly the competitor based in the survey that you just provided is that one. I'm thinking about the market based or the demand for these things. How are you going to tackle that issue?
Yeah, excellent question. It's always an unknown, particularly when you offer a new program or service. But we will look to past history to help us to understand what level of demand was there, what level of participation was there, and allow that to help inform us. Plus, we'll be talking about this as I show you a list of policies and protocols that we're going to be working on in the near future. One of the things that we want to develop is a way to appraise potential new programs. And during that process, we will be trying to measure what the existing demand is. And then certainly after you run programs and services, you should reassess and see if that was actually the case. But we are keeping that in mind. That is important. If you run a program and nobody shows up, then your cost recovery is zero on that.
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful, and I guess I'll say right answer as well, at least from my perspective. Because I look, for example, at on this Mercer room rental number 4 there, you know, where it's 385% of previous cost recovery. So you kind of say, well, that's awful high. Maybe we could lower that. But then I would say, well, wait a minute. If you know we have people lined out the door trying to get that rental for standard special events, you'd say, well, maybe it should even be higher type of thing. So I think you need to, you know, kind of marry both pieces to make sure that
absolutely
you get it right. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. As we said earlier, the fee study is only one factor that we're going to keep in mind as we set our pricing strategy and the overall fees. Demand, market competitiveness, all of those are additional factors. You know, I will just continue to say for tier 5, there is a goal to try to mimic on some programs and services to some degree what the market will bear, what private sector is also offering, and to make sure that those programs and services are covering more than their direct costs, the indirect costs, and supporting other programs and services of the city. You're leveraging your facility and its use to pay for other things. Okay, ready?
Seeing no further questions, I'll turn it back to you, Emily.
Okay, very good. I'm gonna jump ahead. Don't get dizzy. All right, we are now going to turn our attention to the Let's Talk survey results. A report was included in your packet. I'm not going to review every single detail from that. Instead, I'm going to hit some highlights, but I am going to share with audience members who maybe aren't familiar with the survey what was asked, and then give those highlights of what was gathered. And then at the end, we'll have a conversation and you can tell us what you saw in the data and what was interesting. So before everyone took the survey, they had an opportunity to understand the question at hand. And we gave a list of potential policy questions that were sort of at play in answering these questions in the survey. I won't review those either, but I think these questions really went to values and interests and who should benefit, questions like that. And then we tried to hone the actual questions in the survey to try to get to these policy questions. So the first question in the survey had a big lead in. It helped to set the stage by sharing with respondents where the revenue for the facility is coming from, or the programs and services, and therefore who and what was supporting delivery of those programs. And then we asked, given perhaps a reduced budget, and we used something drastic, we asked them to tell us what their priority was for which programs and services should be paid through tax dollars, which should be general fund supported. And the results from that, I'm going to talk about in two different ways. I'm going to introduce the term of positive scores. And what I mean by that is if you take your 5-point scale and you look at the answers on one end that were I really agree with this, I strongly agree with this too, I agree with this, that's your combined positive score. You take those two categories and you lump them together. And so that's how I'm going to talk about results in this survey, because that's a common way that statisticians talk about results. So the highest positive scores, the programs and services where the greatest number of people felt strongly tax support should be given, were for programs and services where there's a balance between the individual and community benefit, and programs and services where the community benefits considerably. So if you were to go back and look at your cost recovery pyramid, what 4 out of 5 people are saying they think should receive the greatest share of tax support are those programs and services that are in levels 1, 2, and possibly level 3. So that's how it relates back to our pyramid. And as you know, those are exactly the tiers that are proposed to receive more tax subsidy. Contrary to that, the lowest positive scores were for programs and services where individuals were benefiting the most, and for special events during the year. So again, community-wide benefit. I'm sorry, had the greatest number of neutral responses. So people kind of didn't know either how to answer that question about special events, or they kind of felt somewhere in between, you know, maybe it should get tax dollars, maybe not, but they didn't feel very strongly one way or another about it. And we still see majority opinion on both of these. That's the way that when you conduct surveys and you don't ask people to rank order, you get lots of high percentage figures on them, but that's okay too. Okay, number 2, we asked people to think about themselves and their families and to tell us how important it was to them that the community center be operated in a certain way. Who should it benefit? Should it offer something for everyone? Should it focus on serving underserved populations or populations that aren't served by the private marketplace? Sometimes this is referred to as helping to fill the gaps in services. Or should it maximize its potential as an evening and weekend venue for the purpose of helping to subsidize and deliver other public programs? And lastly, should the community center be prioritized to host recreation events or programs that support partnerships? And those partnerships we tried to define as the nonprofits that are also serving the community. So should there be some chance to either reserve time or pricing differential or anything like that? Should we prioritize that type of use and make sure that that occurs in the facility? So the answers that we got, over 40% of the respondents said that maximizing the private evening and weekend use of the facility was a good thing, and that they understood that that would help to facilitate those other public programs. And the combined positive score, like we said, was over 74%. So 40% said it was their greatest personal or family interest, and a combined positive score of 74%. Likewise, combined positive score of 74%. Another 40% of the respondents also said that offering something for everyone was really important. So those are the two things people feel most strongly about on this question, maximizing, leveraging the facility, and also making sure that there's diverse programming in the sense that many different types of people are served by the facility. And I wanted to point out, because this question we asked folks to answer from their own perspectives in terms of their families or their individual interests, and not all families have a need for programs that serve either underserved populations or those with special needs. And yet there were 60% of the respondents felt that it was somewhat important or really important to offer programs and services for those populations. So I thought that was important to point out. Number 3 was, how frequently do you visit? This is a really easy one. We just tried to group that into maybe logical amounts of time. And 48% said that they had visited frequently. 1 in 5 approximately had never visited or visited the facility rarely. Number 4, we asked the impossible. We asked the respondents to help us to think through how to prioritize the use of space. As all of you know, I've said it before, I'll probably say it one more time tonight. During any given season, over 60 activities were happening in the center, offered multiple times each season. And so there were a lot of activities and programs for a lot of different audiences or types of participants. And going forward, we can't flip the light switch on and off. We have to do the dimmer switch. And so we are trying to figure out how to prioritize use of the space and what to start using the space for first. So this question was designed to try to help us. So we gave them a real long list of potential audiences and participant groups and types of programs to identify which would be the priorities. And this is what they said. It said that the top priority, the greatest number of people responding said the top priority would be to utilize the facility for seniors, for youth, for adaptive or specialized recreation, school break type programs. That was a combined category for summer camp, before, after school, and school break. And then the last top priority was basically a tie between fitness programs and drop-in sports or activities. On the flip side, and I'm going to take you all the way to the third column there, the activities or the groups that received the fewest number of top priority votes were for the lifestyle type programs, activities or programs for adults, art, special events for the public, and organized athletics. And then in the middle, I wanted to also make sure that we were looking at those programs that didn't receive many votes for top priority. So they weren't voted lowest priority, but they didn't receive many top priority votes. And that column is fairly similar to the third column: organized athletics, adults, lifestyle, special events for public, and drop-in. So that's interesting because drop-in both got highest priority, a great number of votes for top priority, and also got some of the least votes for top priority. And I think that's just reflective of individuals that took the survey, either were participants in drop-in programs and really valued them, or had limited experience with that. Lastly, we are keeping our eye on the PROGRES survey and that work. And so we are aware of what survey respondents told the city there was a need for more of, or that the needs weren't being well met by the city at that time. It is important to understand the context of when that survey was asked. It was pre-pandemic and largely, and the question was phrased in a different way. It was asked, given all that we have today at a time that programs and services were being delivered, what would you like more of? It was an additive type question, whereas in this survey, we were really asking people to think about, if we can do less, what should we offer? And then number 5 was an open-ended question. We asked everyone to tell us what their ideas or considerations they may wish us to take a look at regarding the future delivery of programs and services. And on question number 5, we got a ton of input. It was great stuff. I was happy to see it. And I would say that you could certainly pull out comments from different user groups, individuals that were concerned about impact to a particular program or service and were advocating for it. There was a great diversity of opinions. I would read one comment that would say, we need more programs for kids. And then the next comment would say, too many programs for kids, do more for adults or seniors. So very diverse. Lots of thoughts about who should have access. We sort of drove people to that by the questions that we post in the survey, and who should benefit and who should pay. Some comments about avoiding competing with other Mercer Island entities and complementing services or programs offered elsewhere. I think those are also very valuable comments and something that we are looking at as we start to think about what we will offer in the future. And then great pride in the facility and the programs. People feel that it's very high quality and are grateful to have it in the community and want more people to know about it. So very good input from the survey. This slide just summarizes all that I said. Respondents seem to be in line in terms of their values and interests with how we are setting up the cost recovery pyramid. There's a desire to continue to offer programs and services that reach a variety of ages and interests. And there was clear support for private use of the facility in order to provide for the public use that needs to be subsidized. Half of the respondents had spent some good time there, the other half have not, so there's opportunity. And there was a good deal of clarity, I think, about prioritized use and groups that should have access to the facility. So that was helpful as well. So at this point, Chair, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and we'd be happy to hear your thoughts. What did you see in the data? What stood out to you? What would you like the reset team to know as we continue to process this information and let it be one of the factors that influences that phasing plan of how we reset and start offering programs and services?
Commissioner Cohen has a question or a comment. Don, you're still muted.
I was, thank you, sorry. I was, I guess, pleasantly surprised at the degree of selflessness that large numbers of people had on their rankings of things, that with people of need and seniors, scholarship opportunities. On the flip side of that, I was not surprised to see that there were a lot of people who thought the fees were too low. And I'm not sure whether that is because they want to gain more money to be able to provide more for other services, or it was just people with let's say, an anti-more tax kind of sentiment. And maybe you can find that out later on. The other thing is, there was very strong on, it seemed to me, very strong on off-island should pay more. And I thought, obviously there was a lot of support for pickleball, but I thought one of the interesting things in the open-ended question was trying to come up with activities where different age ranges could participate together, the seniors and the young people. It's something that I only think about from a family point of view, but I thought that was an interesting idea. So anyway, those were my thoughts.
Commissioner Struck.
Thank you, Peter Strong. Yes, I thought the analysis was well done. Just a couple of thoughts. So, really the first question that talks about, level of tax support, I think it did validate our cost recovery pyramid in the sense that generally the respondents felt that if it was an individual benefit type of activity, that there should be less tax support on average than more, and then on community benefit activities, the reverse. So I thought that was fulfilling or rewarding on that. Regarding special events, I think of the special events really where it's available to all as a community type event or community type benefit, but yet it didn't really score that well compared to just other community type benefits. And then when you combine with question 4, would ask, what is the priority, as was mentioned in the presentation, special events are, was fairly low on the priority. So when you combine those two things, it kind of, I think the community is perhaps sending a signal, at least based on these 500 plus respondents, that we should perhaps, really rethink how special events are presented and funded and so forth. Let's see if I had anything. In question 2, I concur that I think that people want a lot of diversity. It was pretty well spread across the board. And then, just based on some of the comments, I think to kind of tack on to what Don said, I think yes, it came out very clear to me that kind of a tiered resident, non-resident type of fee structure was desired or was reasonable. I think the other point that I think was previously made that I had written down before was, again, let's not duplicate service and activities that are provided by others. And I guess it's kind of, well, let's make sure that we're unique, or, we're providing stuff through this facility, perhaps that others, private market, whatever, are not, if they're assuming there's a demand there. And then there was a couple of respondents, I thought that again, talked about establishing leagues and, as opposed to just kind of drop-in types of things. I think there is some social and physical as well as physical benefits if it's a physical activity for that type of thing. And sometimes that's the hardest thing, is for an individual to find a league or to get on a team to participate in whatever activity it is. Thank you.
Commissioner Richter.
This is Amy Richter. Peter, you mentioned the feedback about people interested in leagues, and I thought that it was interesting then to see on the flip side that people had less interest in organized sport or organized athletics, I think you called it, yet they had a high interest of having youth. And I know organized athletics can also be for adults. I just was surprised to see that organized athletics being so low, and I just wondered if you had any insight as to why.
I don't, but it's something that we can continue to ask some questions about. I think, Ryan, you made a couple of points in one of our team meeting about where organized athletics is occurring in Mercer Island, and that there are other providers, and I wondered if maybe you wanted to weigh in on that one.
Happy to. I'll speak a little bit on the community center and who maybe some of the user groups are from the past. From an organized athletic standpoint, it's pretty limited. We have a couple of volleyball groups and maybe a couple of groups that come in, maybe basketball or something like that come into practice. Primarily, those are your youth programs. They're private youth organizations, we'll call it. on island, the biggest provider overall of youth programming is probably the Boys and Girls Club. They have an enormous facility. So their leagues are primarily playing in there, as well as utilizing the school district facilities, those indoor gyms. So our facility here at the community center just hasn't quite seen that spike in usage. So I think that maybe shares a little bit of the story that some of the respondents to the survey, or the majority of the respondents, don't see the community center as a venue for organized athletics. Quite honestly, it's used for practices as opposed to games. We very rarely do we have games happening here at the community center. So I think that might provide a little bit of insight, as well as we've had a number of our fitness classes take place in the gym in the evenings, and those have been extremely popular offerings. So we haven't had the need to implement youth programming or youth sports programming in the gym. It just hasn't been a significant driver to this point.
And then just a follow-up, did we capture any demographic information, like the age groups of who filled it out?
No, not in this survey. We did not.
Commissioner Gualtieri.
This is like very high level comment, and just going back to the very first time you came to our meetings, Emily, I think back in January, when you used the word opportunity so many times, and this whole reset. And so this really is, and I'm just thinking about what Dawn is saying about, maybe people are going to come back in a different way. And I think it's going to be, maybe more family programs. And this is really an opportunity to get new users and different users. And maybe people aren't thinking about organized sports because we haven't really done it in a year, and people are on to different things. And then just related back to the whole fee structure, I just think that, I know you have a lot of research to do, and but I think just one thing to consider is to put the fees very low to come back. And as you said, it's not a switch. It's not all of a sudden going to happen. Maybe new programs, very low fees to get people to start these programs again. And I know you said you're talking to other, Bellevue and Issaquah, and everyone's kind of figuring this out. Maybe we could be at the forefront, not just do what everyone else is doing. And I know everybody needs to recover these costs, but I think we all know this is going to take years, right? So those are just my thoughts, that it may look very different for the first 2 years.
This is Commissioner Westberg. I just had a couple of things to add. It's been a good discussion and good observations. And a couple of things that I was struck by. One was with the exception of a few respondents, overall the willingness of users to support with tax dollars to some extent, varying of course, depending on the activity, but to support the programs of the community center, which was encouraging to see, because I think starting out it will require some level of tax support. And again, I think touching on what Commissioner Struck said, sort of the surprise to fall out of this for me was community events. In the PROGRES survey, that was one of the things that was mentioned that we need more of, and we need greater emphasis on those kind of events which build a broader sense of community. But the support in this survey for such events was kind of tepid at best. And I was a little bit surprised by that. And then there were several other anomalies looking at this data compared to the PROGRES data. Art programs in particular figured very high among the list of things that we need to do more of in the PROGRES plan survey, and yet here they were well down the list. So I don't know how you try to reconcile all of that. And then in terms of the comments, reading through the written comments, it's clear that there are people who are passionate and very loyal to the programs that they participated in pre-pandemic, and are anxious to get back to those, both from the standpoint, I think, of because they enjoy the activity, but also from the social and benefits that those programs provide. That's where it would have been interesting to see some demographic data, I think, because we kind of went quickly through that pie chart that showed how often people visit, but 31.2% visit 5 times a week. That's huge. And you kind of wonder how you overlay that group with the the people that are passionate about one program or another. But clearly, if you're serving, if 31% of your visitors are there are on an almost daily visit, or daily basis, you're serving a very important need for people, and we somehow need to tease that out as we start to make decisions about what's offered. Okay, Don Cohen, I see a question from Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Don Cohen. I wondered on Commissioner Westberg's comment about community programs and the community events and the anomaly between the two different surveys. I wondered whether that had to do with some people feeling that there are just too many of them, not that they aren't important. And if, because if you just said, do you want to have summer celebration, then you get the pros plan survey result, right? If you say, do you want the firehouse breakfast? Do you want this? Do you want that? And so forth. It starts to dilute potentially the level of importance in people. So I wonder, but I don't have any idea, but that's what occurred to me.
Commissioner Ryan Daly, Operations Transition Team Manager. If I could chime in a little bit on that, I think you highlight an interesting point when you look at the events that are taking place in our parks versus the events we have attempted to host in the community center. Typically, the events within the community center are much lower in attendance compared to those park events, and I think that probably rightfully so demonstrates the need maybe that's out there. Maybe it is more of a park-based need for some of these events as opposed to indoor community center type programs that are maybe a little bit more specific to certain age demographics. So it is something to think about. I know that's something that's been on my mind quite a bit. So thank you for that comment.
Yes, and Chair, I'll jump in and just echo to some degree what Ryan said. The design of the question, I think, was part of why we got the answer that we did, and that was, how do we prioritize the space at the community center? Should it be for special events, for example? And I think community members may or may not think of the community center as being the place for special events. And you can look at the PROS data and you can see that the top priority events were summer celebration and mostly music in the park, not necessarily community center events. So yeah, I wouldn't read a ton into that, but what it does tell me is that the community center may not need to be the primary place for those special events. I also wanted to speak to just a couple of points that Chair Westberg made. Hopefully this will also help as you process results. You spoke about the PROS data on arts, and what I would say about that is there may be different audiences that were reached by these two different survey instruments. Again, the question was asked in a different way. What do you want more of was the PROS, and we said, given that maybe we're going to have less, what is the priority? So that may be part of why we got a little different result. And then I would say that, and since I'm also facilitating similar meetings with the Arts Council, I think there's dialogue in the community about who provides that type of programming. And so maybe some of the result that we got asking about the community center was a product of people in the community thinking, well, the community center doesn't have to be prioritized for arts programming. There are maybe other places in the community that are acting as providers for that service as well. So I don't know, but that's what went through my mind as I saw those results and thought about what the PROS survey also showed.
Yeah, thanks for those clarifications. I mean, I know that the surveys were designed to answer different questions. It was interesting how, as a result of that, the responses came back so different. And also the clarification that the focus here is on the community center and the programming that takes place there.
Right.
I don't see any other questions. I wonder if this would be an appropriate time to take a break.
Yes. Great
and
minds think alike. I have
and
that
come
down
back.
on my
So-
program, that this would be a good time for, say, a 5-minute break or so.
So I have 6:46. Why don't we come back at 6:55?
Very good.
Okay, and remember to turn off your mic and your video. Thank you. Okay, my clock says 6:55. We'll give folks another minute and then restart. Okay, Emily, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to make sure this is shared, is we've talked about a lot of data, a lot of input, but we're getting to that moment where we have to decide what we're going to offer, when, how. And so we're going to start talking about specifics. So this is a graphic I've shown before. It was a slightly different layout in a previous presentation. Our future philosophy on cost recovery and resource allocation in part is helping us to decide what to offer, when, and how. It's part of the puzzle. And we have these goals in mind with that philosophy to make sure that services and programs were aligned with values and goals, that we were focused on financial sustainability in a way that served the whole, and that we were making a purposeful balance between programs and services that serve individuals and also community benefit. So I think this is a good graphic to keep in mind as we go forward too. This is what the core of the philosophy is, and this is in part how we should start to look at what to offer. So that resource allocation and cost recovery philosophy are really focused on helping us to maintain the financial control over services and programs, but it also helps us to build equity into the offerings and the prices for those offerings, and it helps us to identify those core services. And last time when we met, we talked about the core services in a couple of different ways. We talked about the social and public good core, which is really represented in tiers 1 and 2 in the pyramid. And we talked about the business sustainability core, which are largely represented in tiers 5 and 4. So we're looking for balance between those as well. And then in green, I wanted to point out that our new philosophy and the parameters in the policy that supports that philosophy will also help us to not only decide what to offer and to say yes to, but should also help us to say no to offering everything again or everything at one time. And that's important because we want to make sure that we're not overextending, acting irresponsibly by giving, city resources or taxpayer dollars towards programs and services that are inconsistent with those other goals that we have talked about. And you'll hear me talk about stewardship as well, because that's a big part of saying yes and saying no. So just a reminder, this was your cost recovery resource allocation pyramid. We have not made any changes to it, but I wanted to show it during this presentation. Again, this is part of how we will be deciding what to recommend, when, and how. Also, we're posing questions still at this time, and we think to answer the question of what we should offer, when and why, we want to ask what's going to help us to make sure that we are upholding that new strategy, that we are still representing community values, we're still attending to community needs, And we're in the best possible position to be successful in achieving our performance and quality goals for the services and programs. And that ultimately should be what gets the resources. So this is all that I've said, put in maybe slightly different way here in the first bullet. We're going to focus on delivering core and essential services. Again, those are ones largely found in tier 1, some in tier 2, and then the business sustainability core that's found in tiers 5 and some in 4. Another guiding principle that we have as we're deciding what to offer, when, why, how, is we really want to focus on doing some things well before we start more. We feel that that is the most responsible way to proceed. And then I spoke about stewardship. We have to build that in. That takes staff time, that takes resources, but it's critical to the success of the division, to public trust. And so we are going to be recommending that we allocate enough resources toward the tools and the processes that need to be in place. So that includes program development and evaluation tools. We talked a little bit about that earlier, making sure that the building is well maintained and the equipment in it, building and tracking those program level budgets. If we don't do that, we're not going to be able to report back on how well the strategy is working, and reporting on not only those cost recovery, but other goals that we may develop for programs and services. In your packet, we gave you a diagram that we said is just it was another thought resource tool for staff. This is a very simplified version of that same matrix. We are also trying to think through what is possible, what is feasible at what moment in time. And so we're analyzing what level of resources are needed to plan and carry out different programs and services, and then what's kind of the return on investment for that. And we're looking at return on investment as a composite of a few factors. It's not only the number of people that could be served or have been served in the past by those programs, but the cost recovery as well. And we want to try to, as best we can, focus on those programs and services that are giving the city a high return on investment, serving many people, helping to pay for other programs and services, and may not be the greatest demand on resources. That would be ideal. We certainly know we're going to have to offer programs and services that are everywhere on this chart, but we want to do as much as we can that's in that sweet spot. So I wanted to talk about how we think that boils down. On the left, I have shown the programs and services that the division is currently offering. I think we've shared these in past packets, but staff is still taking reservations for fields, issuing boat launch permits. The annex is still in use and being leased. P-patch program is up and running. We're granting some special uses of parks, and the summer camp and the facility rentals are near-term programs and services that will be added, and we've discussed that with regard to your immediate action plan. So looking beyond immediate action, what's next? We haven't designed that down to the exact class program activity level, but these are our initial thoughts that we want to discuss with you tonight. We believe that it will be important to offer those tier 1 services, or most of them. Those that also represents your foundational level, your administrative tasks. We think obviously those are going to be important to stand up first so that they can support other programs and services. In tier 1, you have the social human services category of programs and the volunteer program. And we think those two categories are going to need a little bit more time and attention to figure out exactly what those programs look like in the future. The volunteer program, I understand the city may be talking about citywide as more of a centralized program. And so that's an ongoing discussion. The human services is an arena where I think the city needs to really decide which department is going to be offering which services, because you have your youth and family services group as well. So we're saying perhaps all of tier 1 except for that group for the first phase of implementation. And then tier 2 has quite a few of those highly valued services, those services that also have more community-wide benefit and were desired. There are also some tier 3 programs that we think should be offered sooner rather than later. And drop-in might be one of those services, a lower resource service, a higher return on investment, number of people participating, and may be able to be coupled with some other tier 2 or tier 1 services being provided in the building. And therefore you can have the efficiency of staff within the building to offer that service. But the rest of tier 3, we think should wait for a subsequent phase. All of these programs and services shouldn't be offered until they're going to be resourced appropriately and can be efficiently delivered. And then the last phase of what we're looking at in the roadmap for the reset would include some from tier 3, some from tier 4, and some from tier 5. And that those more individualized benefit programs could be offered once we get fee schedule established, resources are in place, other programs and services are up and operating well. And as we determine those programs are also needed. We will have to offer some of those programs too in order to subsidize the programs from the lower tiers. And then lastly on this slide, I wanted to make a pitch for a couple different services. One is marketing. I think the overall success of the entire cost recovery program or all programs and services with the city hinges on the ability to do a good job marketing programs and services. So that is one of the functions in that administrative overhead line or category in tier 1 that I think needs to be adequately resourced. I will make a pitch for a volunteer program. If the city is going to do that in some sort of collective way, great. If not, then I think the rec division should get busy on standing up its own. I have found those to be incredibly valuable resources, great way to engage the public, opportunities for mixed age groups to work together, leadership opportunities, etc. So I'm hopeful the city would choose also to put some resources into developing and carrying out an excellent volunteer program. And then lastly, part of that administrative overhead, we will be recommending that the city provide sufficient resources in order to operate the facility and provide for the rentals and all the other uses that are going to be happening in, say, phase 1 of this reset plan. So it is 7:09 by my clock. And this is the moment that I wanted to turn it over and ask all of you to help us make some of those final recommendations that will be coming back to you on March 4th in terms of programs and services to start up. And we're anticipating on March 4th during your regular meeting, we're going to give you a phasing plan. That phasing plan will show what we think we can get ready and move on throughout the remainder of this year. Second phase would involve programs and services we would target to potentially start in next year, and then a third phase for 2023. So that's the long-term roadmap. And we're going to divide those categories of programs and services from your cost recovery pyramid into those different phases. I will also say that when we presented that model to you before, we said each of those categories represented either past programs and services or potential programs and services. So some of those labels, city wasn't running programs in those areas, but could in the future. And conversely, going into the future, as Commissioner Gualtieri said, we don't necessarily need to do things that everybody else is doing or things that we did in the past. We can think about different categories of programs and services. So I'll remind you that those categories are fluid. We can continue to adjust them as we go forward with the reset plan. So with that, Chair, my prompt is, what input would commission members like to make to the reset team about how to phase in programs and services of recreation and the Community and Events Center?
Commissioner McCarthy.
Thank you, Jody McCarthy. I just wanted to clarify with the volunteer, are you talking about the Voice and SVP program, or are you that the youth have usually done, like middle school and high schoolers have been doing those programs on Mercer Island for a really long time? Or are you thinking more of the like volunteer cleaning up the parks kind of volunteering when you say volunteer programs?
So I'm thinking very comprehensively about the programs and services that recreation or the community center might offer and the way in which volunteers might be able to help deliver those programs and services. So a volunteer program, just speaking off the top of my head, a volunteer program could be greeters at your front desk. It could be people assisting with the art gallery there. It could be individuals helping with programs. It could be a whole range of jobs that those volunteers are doing for the city.
Okay, thank you for that. And then my other question or comment was, have you started looking at the data for all of the programs that we had in the before times to see like which programs were the most successful, to look at where it's going to be the biggest impact to bring those back? It certainly seems like senior and youth programs are the highest demand, but running over 60 programs every season, clearly those can be, there's got to be some standouts from those programs that would be beneficial to bring those ones back immediately.
Yes, that's one of the factors that we're looking at.
Perfect, thank you.
Commissioner Struck.
Thank you, Peter Struck. My input would be, I guess, a couple fold. First, not a lot of meat on the bones here, so I'm just going to kind of try to talk. But I get the sense, and it's only a sense, is the process is going to be, well, we're going to have to create a lot of infrastructure and cost, and then our quote unquote most profitable programs probably are going to be on the back end quite a bit. So I guess that's a way of I would be saying is I like to see a budget of saying, by quarter, by month, however you want to do it, or just trying to understand it. Because I suspect when this gets to the city council level, not speaking for them, but I would think that they would, because I think that, as I recall, the city budget just kind of had a bare bones, and they told the council, the city manager said, well, we'll come back to you with a kind of updated budget and so forth. yeah, I would feel very uncomfortable coming back to them and saying, well, this process is going to produce a, you know, a large deficit in the first year because, you know, we have to do all this planning ahead of time and so forth. So I guess I would like to see that. And I think, yeah, I think starting with that, I guess, is where I would end.
Great, thank you for that. We are planning, in addition to providing you the phasing plan, we are planning to provide you with a resourcing plan for phase 1. Right at this time, we're not planning to do that for subsequent phases, given that they're a ways out and we have more work to do to figure out the finer detail on those. But for phase 1, we will, the package of materials that will ultimately go over to council will include resource requests, a budget request for phase 1. And in putting that together, we will probably also attempt to analyze some amount of revenue that we think could be generated. That's going to be very difficult. I'll be very frank about that, given that there's a limited number of programs and services that we are going to recommend in phase 1. Many of those programs and services, again, are in tier 1 because you have to start with the foundation. And some are in phase 5. So you are tier 5. So you would think that the tier 5 might be able to offset the cost of tier 1. And we hope that's the case, but the tier 5 programs that we're going to start with, like facility rentals, at this moment in time, your guess is as good as mine about how quickly people will come back and rent the facility. So we're going to put our best thoughts on the page. There will be certainly more clarity about the expense side than the revenue side. But we will continue to keep you and council apprised about the ability to reach those cost recovery goals.
Yeah, this is Peter Strzok. Just to follow up, I agree 100% that clearly the forecasting or the uncertainty on the revenue side is much greater than on the cost side. So I guess my caution or advice is that I would be very mindful then on the expense side, because I think the last thing one would want to do as a manager is to, you know, get 6 months into it, find out that your revenue forecasts, you know, did not come to fruition for any number of reasons, and then you're looking to say, oh, we got to cut expenses, and generally most expenses are personnel related. So I just wouldn't want to get us in that position if at all possible.
Okay, thank you.
Emily, could I ask you to stop sharing your screen? Thank you.
Whoops.
Any other questions from any of the other commissioners or comments? This is Commissioner Westberg. I'll just throw this out. It's a little unclear to me, Emily, what you're looking for from us now, because you presented a lot of information. My thought is, you know, I need to sit down with the tier pyramid and the list of programs on one side and all the criteria you went over on the other side, and then and discuss each of those programs individually based on the criteria. Really do a deep dive. And I know we're not going to do that tonight. I don't want to get anybody worried about that. But I assume that's what the team is going to do, and then bring back that product to this group to kind of look at and
That's correct.
and
That's correct.
react to.
Yes, that's correct. So
And overlay it with the budget concerns that Peter talked about.
That's correct. That's correct. So we will be bringing that phasing plan and the budget request, at least the initial numbers, to you at the March 4th meeting. So coming very soon, and then you will have something very tangible to react to. Tonight is really just helping you understand everything that's in our heads, everything we've collected thus far, and then asking you if you have any additional thoughts right now that we should continue to keep in mind as we pull together that proposal for you.
Well, obviously the overriding thought is what happens with COVID and how soon we can begin to undertake anything in terms of normal programming or programming that brings people together. So, and I'm sure that's part of your consideration as well, but that's sort of the elephant in the room. Commissioner Struck.
Thank you, Peter Struck. Yeah, with Roy talking, one other thought I had was, as you think about programs, I guess, and again, kind of in this transitory COVID situation and everything, I would think really about uniqueness again. And I know that's a term that we've used before, but what are things that others don't offer at this point? Maybe a year from now they'll be offering or something. So again, they still have to meet all the other criteria, but I would think about that as well. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I don't see any, so back to Emily.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to share again. One last slide, I believe. Okay, and I wanted to just wrap up by telling you what's next. So the team is going to work on finalizing some recommendations on the pricing strategy and the resource allocation philosophy that then moves right into all this work about establishing the fee schedule and attending to any policies that need to be updated to get in sync with that new pricing strategy. And then also flows directly into outlining the phases for the reset, what programs would be offered when, and quantifying the resources needs to get those phases up off of the ground. And we're going to start with phase one, also for the purpose of being flexible with COVID. And then we're going to put together a list of other policies and procedures that may need some attention, again, to get in sync with the new strategies that we are putting into place. And with just resetting, how are we doing things differently or better? Opportunity. And lastly, we're going to collate all of this information, weave it together into final recommendations for you first, and then the City Council. And that's going to be the reset roadmap. Our schedule is we're going to return to you on your March 4th regular meeting. That's when I'm expecting that we're going to have some final words on pricing strategy and resource allocation. We're also going to show you the phases for the reset and the phase one resourcing plan. We'll show you a list of policies that we're going to be targeting for attention during those phases. And then on March 18th, there's a Parks and Recreation Commission special meeting where we hope to show you all of that collated into a draft strategy and roadmap. And then on April 1st, you'll have another regular meeting. That'll be the opportunity to hopefully put the final touches on the draft that will go to City Council. And I understand that there are plans in the works to have a joint meeting between City Council and the Parks and Rec Commission on April 20th. That's when the whole plan will be presented to City Council, and we will get their input at that time. Come back to all of you very early May, make any fine tuning that needs to be done, and then return to Council later in May or early June for hopefully their blessing on that strategy and that roadmap. Are there any questions about the schedule?
Commissioner Cohen.
Don Cohen, this isn't about the schedule. It was picking up on something that Commissioner Westberg said, if I can say that. whatever it is that you put together to synthesize this information, I guess, at least on a personal level, I would say have it so that some of us mere mortals can follow it as easily as possible. Because you people and some of the commissioners too deal with these things on a daily basis at a very detailed level. So for example, in the materials sent out for this meeting, when you referred, whoever put this together referred to this simple depiction of the thing that had the balloons in it at different parts, I looked at that several times for a long time and had a lot of trouble with it. So I'm not saying that you ought to play necessarily to the least intuitive of us, but some of this is not second nature to some of us.
Great reminder. Thank you very much. We will do our best.
Any other questions or comments for the good of the order?
Chair, if I could chime in real quick on the schedule. On March 4th, I anticipate bringing forward a little bit of a schedule for the commission as a whole of where we're going, so that you have a good idea of your meeting schedule as we move forward, specifically with the PROGRES plan, as well as the Luther Burbank Dock project. So I know some of you may be a little uncomfortable right now not knowing where we're at after April. At least I was. So I do want to make sure that I bring that forward to you and have the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have regarding the PROGRES plan process as we move forward, which is delayed a little bit. I'll give you that nugget right now.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Don, did you have another comment or question?
No, sorry.
Okay. Okay. Emily, does that conclude your portion of the
It does. Thank you very much.
meeting? And Ryan, did you have anything that you wanted to say before we adjourn? Anything else?
I would just confirm, thank you, commissioners, for responding to my request for the March 18th meeting. I believe we only have one commissioner who's unable to make that date work. So it's very helpful to staff, and as we keep this project rolling, your availability is greatly appreciated. So thank you.
Okay, and I would just add my thanks, Ryan, to you and Emily. I think this presentation was very good. There's obviously a lot of pieces that that go into a project this big, and pulling them all together is, I don't know how you're going to meet your deadlines, frankly, but I look forward to seeing the information on March 4th, or actually I look forward to seeing it hopefully a little before that, just so we can digest it. But in any event, thank you, commissioners, for hanging in there. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 4th at 5:30. So the time now is 7:28, and this meeting is adjourned. Please stay seated and keep your video cameras on until the city staff has terminated the Zoom broadcast.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording now.